Who is tired of all of this pandemic isolation and the long waiting that comes with it? Raise your hand if you're tired of pandemic isolation. Me, I can't really raise my hand because coffee in one hand, phone in the other. But yeah, we get tired of waiting. And so I want to think with you for just a couple minutes today, a few minutes about waiting and how God's people have often had to wait during their history. So think with me about some of the waiting that God's people had to do. Think about Noah and his family, depending on how you count, 370 days on the ark. And you want to talk about isolation. Man, we're not talking about essential runs to the grocery store. You got all your food stores there on the boat with you, and you don't leave for 370 days. That's some pretty significant waiting in isolation. It keeps going. I've got a list over here so I don't forget them. But think about Job in his suffering, not knowing when it would end, not knowing if it would end in death or with his health being restored, and he waits for such a time. We don't know how long it is, but to go through everything that he did and everything that we read in Job must have been some significant length of time that he waited. Think about Jacob. He wants to marry Rachel, and so he's got to work for 7 years for her. And then he doesn't get Rachel. He gets her sister Leah. Then Rachel, but he's still got to work another 7 years of waiting. Think about Israel, 400 plus years in slavery in Egypt. Now, we talk about our freedoms being restricted during these days. Think about 400 years of slavery that they endured. And then once they're out of Egypt, there's these, due to their own sin, there's these 40 years of wandering in the wilderness where they're waiting to go into the promised land. 40 years before they get to set foot in the promised land. I think about Jonah, and this is a little bit different, but 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish. You say, that's not very long. But if you've ever laid awake at night, and the darkness of soul, even that you may experience with depression or other emotional, mental, spiritual distress, then one night can feel like an eternity. 3 days and 3 nights Jonah waits in the belly of that fish. Think about the exiles after they're carried out of Judah to Babylon. 70 years in exile before being restored to the promised land. And then from that restoration to the land until Jesus comes again, hundreds of years until Christ comes. And so you see Simeon, who's waiting for the consolation of Israel, and finally he sees the salvation, gets to hold Jesus in his arms. But there's that long wait. You think about the disciples after the death of Jesus, and they thought he was dead. They forgot about his predictions of resurrection and different things. But imagine the wait from Friday night to Sunday morning till the third day, similar to Jonah's wait. On the third day he rises, and their wait comes to an end. And then really all of God's people since then are waiting for something, aren't we? We're waiting for the second coming of Christ. And so I just remind us of that, to put our waiting in these days of isolation, to put that into some kind of context, that this is not a new thing for God's people. And so we're not really surprised in Scripture to see all of these commands for waiting on the Lord, for perseverance, for patience, for endurance, for contentment. God calls his people to these things. And what I want you to be encouraged with today is that those are not impossible commands. God has given grace to his people throughout the years, throughout the centuries. He's given his people grace and strength to wait. And so these commands to wait don't come to us without promises. It's not suck it up, do this in your own strength. It's, you are my people. And God has been with his people in waiting again, for years and for centuries, he's provided for them in their waiting, in their suffering. And so, in addition to the commands to wait and be to be patient and to endure and to be content, there are all of these promises. And so in 2 Peter 1, his divine power has given us everything that we need for life and for godliness. Or you think of Hebrews 13 and verse 5, the second part of verse 5 and verse 6. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? So while we wait, yes, but we wait with the promises of God and with God himself present with us. He says, listen, my son has died to forgive all of your impatience and all of your lack of endurance and all of your lack of contentment. And he now gives you grace to walk in patience and endurance and contentment. God has seen his people through long periods of waiting before, and he will see you and I through. Sometimes the command and the promise come in the same verse. And so I'm just going to read for you one other one, Joshua 1:9, really familiar one to many people. They're about to go into the promised land, and he says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed. Now, if it stopped there, we're like, there's these giants in the land. We've been wandering for 40 years, and you're telling us be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened. Do not be dismayed. We can't do that. There's more. There's the promise. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. He is with us in these days of waiting. Child of God, he loves you. He's with you. Part of his plan for you is waiting. It has been throughout the history of his people. And until Christ comes again, which we're waiting for, it will be part of his plan for us. Periods of waiting and difficulty and isolation, but we're not truly isolated because he is with us and he gives us everything that we need for those periods. He's proven it again and again and again, and he's not going to fail or forsake his people this time. And I pray that we find comfort and refuge in that reality.